I want to introduce you to a partner that we have for this discussion, which is Aging Together and Ellen Phipps. And I really give Ellen a lot of credit in introducing me to Sonya and today's topic because of these wonderful conferences that Ellen and Aging Together host every fall. It's a dementia conference, and Ellen, your panel of speakers at those is amazing. And that's where I heard Sonya speak, and I was like, I would love to get you on our platform. So I want to thank you for that. But for folks that might not know you and Aging Together, share with us a little bit about your organization.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Steve. It's been just such a great pleasure to work with you as well. I'm a big fan of Sonia's. I've known her for quite a while. She is what I like to think of her as the queen of person-centered care. She's just awesome. And I do welcome the opportunity, as always, to talk a little bit about aging together. As I'm sure everybody on this webinar knows and understands, Virginia's population is aging, just like the nation. And right now, there's about 1.9 million people who are 60 or over in Virginia. And by 2030, that's going to be like 2.2 million, right? So, in our region, which is the five-county region of Culpeper, Orange, Rappahannock, Fauquier, and Madison counties, we determined that no one agency alone could be able to meet the needs and preferences of older adults. And that's why Aging Together was created about 20 years ago by some very forward-thinking people. And what we do at Aging Together, a lot of people think we're an area agency on aging. We are not, but we work really closely with our uh, with our area agency on aging. For sure, we do. It's a partnership, and all of our partners. And what we actually do is we connect people to resources to improve quality of life as people age. And I think the best way to describe Aging Together is we work through our volunteer teams. We have teams in each of our five counties, and the teams are made up of people who really have their finger on the pulse of what's going on out in the communities. And we look at gaps in services, and then we sort of step up and try to fill those gaps or help to provide funding where other people are improving the gaps. And so some of the things that we do, the more tangible things that we do, every year we have the Art of Aging Expos, which is basically these giant resource fairs where we have, 60 plus exhibitors and people from all over sort of providing that who provide services and programs for older adults. We are big proponents of Dementia Friends and Dementia Friendly, and we just started this pilot of Dementia Friendly Culpeper this year, and we now have over 50 restaurants and businesses that are dementia friends in Culpeper. And every year, as Steve was saying, we have our annual conference. It looks like we have some fabulous speakers again this year. So stay tuned and save the date. It's going to be December 5th, a little bit later this year, but it will be on December 5th. We have a 5 over 50 celebration that celebrates the contributions of older adults in our communities because a lot of times negative stereotypes of aging, people are surprised to see the incredible contributions that older adults make to our communities. We have a resource guide as well for our five-county region. And we have educational webinars. You can learn more about us by going to our website at agingtogether.org. But I'm just excited to be here today. And, thank you again, Steve,
Oh,
and
yeah.
for the opportunity. And thanks to Sonya, because she's awesome.
Yeah, no, and I dropped the website into chat, I'm guilty as charged. I thought you were an area agency on aging too, so I'm glad we
Yeah.
got this clarity because I've been working with you for years. But the and we we're fortunate to have an audience now that's all over the country. Ellen, are you cool if somebody is in another region and wanted to brainstorm about how you put this together? Because it
Oh,
is
absolutely.
okay.
Aging together, it's such a fabulous model because there, the area agencies are fantastic. And like I said a couple of times, we work really closely with our AAA. But it with the change in demographics, it's just challenging for one organization to be able to meet all the needs and
Yeah.
services. And so that's where we come in. It's a great model, and there are advantages of not being a governmental agency.
Yep.
We always buy the wine for all the government events at Aging Together. That's one of our functions.
Hey, we just had the producer of a documentary film called Wine, Women, and Dementia. So that
Oh
might
my
be
gosh.
something to screen with the for you
I
guys.
love that. Oh my
Yeah. So
gosh.
anyways, well, let's I'm really psyched. If you want to hang out, let's bring Sonya onto the stage and really charged up to have a great discussion today on person-centered care and for Sonya to share her perspective. But Sonya, great to see you. And okay,
It's so
great.
great to
I was
see you
gonna
too.
say,
I'm getting my slides here. Sorry, it's a little,
oh no,
there we
this is
go.
great. I was gonna say, I know you've got a slide deck, so Ellen and I are gonna duck behind the curtain and the we're going to duck behind the curtain. And I want to remind everybody that if you've got questions, comments, feel free to drop them into Q&A or chat. We will address those. And Sonya, feel free to take a few breaks and check in with me. And if there's any questions, we'll make sure to address them.
Thank you so much. I'm so thrilled to be here with you today, and this is such an important topic that's near and dear to my heart. And love, especially being both of you, I consider pro-aging and aging together to be friends. Being in Virginia, I'm just so honored that aging together is in our world. So thank you. So yes, we are going to talk today, and I do see this as a discussion about this idea of seeing the person before their dementia. So I'm going to throw out a bunch of different ideas to all of you and certainly encourage you to chime in and to just tell me what you think about some of this stuff. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself first. So I am what I call a revisionary gerontologist. I sort of made up that term, revisionary gerontologist, because I believe that I am a gerontologist whose work is about changing the way that we think about dementia and aging. So I'm trying to revise the story. And that is what I've worked on for the 30 years of my career, is advocating for people with dementia and seeing people with dementia differently. I have a consulting business called Sonya Barsness Consulting, and we provide a couple of different services. I provide consulting to organizations to help them better support people living with dementia. So that could be senior living, nonprofits, could be like doing presentations for Aging Together. I provide courses for people living with dementia to learn how to better navigate dementia in a way that's focused on personhood and hope. And I provide consulting also to individuals with dementia and their families, helping them to navigate dementia. So I've been, as I said, in the field for a long time, and I've had the privilege of learning from many people with dementia and their families about their experiences. And so you'll certainly hear about some of that today. I also am a faculty at Georgetown University's Aging and Health Program and VCU's Department of Gerontology. And I like to just say sometimes, because I know that gerontology has an identity crisis, that as gerontologists, we are actually not medical providers. We're not physicians. We are the non-medical side of aging. We're actually the multidimensional side of aging. So as gerontologists, we look at the whole picture of growing older and growing with dementia. And I think you'll see that reflected in some of the things that I'm going to talk about today. There's some of my contact info. I'll have that up again at the end. So I always start with the voices of people living with dementia, because I think that is where we have to always start. And so this is a quote from Richard Taylor, who is a person who lived with dementia. Richard passed away a few years ago. And Richard reminded us all of the time that he is a complete human being. He is marching to a different drummer, but he is still a human being with the same needs as any other human being. This quote is actually from a person living with dementia who I worked with in one of my support groups. I've facilitated several groups over the years, what we call early stage groups, which are support groups for people living with dementia to learn about how to live with dementia, but also to share their experiences with other people living with dementia. And this was shared with me when we were having a discussion. Actually, I had screened with the group. It's a short movie called Person-Centered Matters that was created by the Dementia Action Alliance. And this was John's reflection on that. And he spoke about how he felt like as soon as he was diagnosed with dementia, that people automatically made assumptions about what he could and couldn't do. Not really looking at him as John, as, all the things that he could do, but just an assumption based on his diagnosis alone. And that he really didn't feel like now that he had dementia, he had the same opportunities to determine for himself what he could and couldn't do. And I would say that, John, he was still very capable of doing things. Like he would actually give our group presentations on shells and marine life. And that was something that was a passion of his. But he did feel again that this diagnosis sometimes kept people from seeing him as a whole person and from seeing the things that he could do. So I always felt like it was a very profound quote. So thanks to John. This is also one of my favorite quotes that I think in some ways encapsulates what I believe about people living with dementia. And this is from a book called Dancing with Elephants, which was written by Jerem Sawatsky, who lives with Huntington's disease, which is a form of dementia. And I love this idea that John Kabat-Zinn said that there is more that is right with people with dementia that is wrong with people with dementia. I mean, just think about that for a second, that idea, that we tend to focus on everything that's wrong with people, but there's so much that's right with people. I mean, we're probably guilty of this with many different people, right? Not just people with dementia. But what he really, I think, importantly said is that perhaps the medical and healthcare system is more focused on what's wrong with people, and we'll let them do that. They can focus on the deficits, but for the rest of us, let's focus on what is right with people. Let's see what's right with them. Let's actively try to see, what is right with a person with dementia. And when we do that, we actually find that people are energized by this, that this is what brings them to life. So I'm just going to pause for a second before I go on here and just see if there's any comments, or Steve or Ellen, if you have anything you want to share.
Yeah, no, this is great introduction, and I tell you, I am blown away at the especially with mild cognitive impairment, how much purpose people can continue deep into the diagnosis of dementia and Alzheimer's. And actually, here a question just came through. Are you of the belief that dementia is a disease rather than an outcome or symptom of an actual illness like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's?
That's a great question. So I'm glad that you brought that up, questioner, is because I meant to say too that when I use the term dementia, I'm using it as kind of an umbrella term to describe the cognitive symptoms that a person experiences, which are everything from memory loss to challenges with learning and attention to executive function challenges. So I use that term to talk about the actual cognitive challenges, with the understanding that dementia is caused by many different things: Alzheimer's disease, vascular disease, Parkinson's, Huntington's, etc. So I am using it, yes, in that context of dementia itself being not a disease per se, but it being caused by different diseases. But and every person, as we know, that has dementia experiences it differently, including the types of symptoms they have. I mean, there are types of dementia in which memory loss is actually not the primary concern. So, and I'm glad, see, that you said mild cognitive impairment as well, because I also include that in this topic that we're talking about, because when people are diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, which is considered sort of a precursor to dementia, or a lesser type of cognitive impairment, they also, I think, experience some of the things that we're talking about. And I think there also is a need for us to look at the whole person with cognitive impairment and to consider what they can still do. So thank you for that.
All right. Yeah, so I think we're good.
Okay.
Yeah, keep on going. This is great.
Okay, awesome. So I always love, you'll see I like lots of quotes because I think that these are just really helpful in us thinking through some of these topics. And I really appreciate this quote from Sam Fazio, who is a researcher who has worked very long advocating for people with dementia. And he points out that the most disabling effects of brain disease are actually not so much in the functional impairment, but in the threats to oneself and personhood. So just for context, he's not saying that the challenges one experiences due to brain disease or that cause functional impairment are not important to a person. It's just that we really can't forget that there are many other things that actually make living with a brain disease with dementia very difficult, and they could even be more disabling. So, like an example actually could be when a person with dementia or cognitive impairment can no longer drive. So the reason why they can't drive is essentially because of brain changes that make it very difficult and unsafe for them to operate a car. But you could actually argue, if you've ever, been with a person who has not been able to drive anymore, that what's more disabling to them rather than the functional impairment is actually what this does to their identity. You hear people say, I hate not being able to drive because I like to have freedom. I like to go where I want to go. I like to be able to meet up with my friends when I want to meet up with my friends. I feel like I'm a child now. And that reflects something more than just the functional impairment. That tells us that this is a threat to someone's identity, to who they are as a person. And so I think it's such an important reminder that this experience of this brain disease for people is much more than the actual cognitive part and what that does to that in terms of what they can and can't do cognitively. So this is such an important quote also to me because this idea of personhood is something that's very near and dear to my heart and is something that we're going to talk about in a little bit more depth is the idea of what personhood is actually about when we're talking about with people with dementia. And it's certainly treating people with dignity and respect and supporting their sense of self. But it's really this idea of how do we treat a person with dementia as a person first and foremost. And I wanted to just mention that there's a couple of different things about personhood that we have to keep in mind is that personhood is something that we have. It's kind of in a very basic way. It's how we see ourselves. It's how other people see ourselves. So I'm Sonya. I have a fear of jellyfish. I love Kermit the Frog. I'm a wife. I'm a daughter. I'm an aunt. I'm all these different things. That's a part of my personhood. But my personhood is also supported by how other people see me and how other people see those things in me. So if I had dementia, I would want people to see all of those things about me so that I continue to feel like I'm a person, that I'm not just a cognitively impaired being. And so this is what this idea of personhood is really about, is how do we ensure that we're truly seeing every aspect of a person? And then what does that look like in reality and why does that matter? So we'll discuss this. So Tom Kitwood, who is a psychologist, a gerontologist, is kind of the father of person-centered care in dementia, defines personhood actually as this idea that it's a standing that's or a status that's bestowed upon a person by another person. So he talks about this idea with people with dementia that if we want to foster personhood and a person with dementia, it is actually the way that we see and treat that person that fosters personhood. So it's almost like a responsibility we have in a way to not only try to see this person as more than their dementia, to see what's right with them, but then also to cultivate that in them. So that means, in some ways, fostering someone's identity, knowing how a person wants to be seen and ensuring that we are using that in our interactions with a person with dementia. So, simple examples are things like if a person was a physician, we might continue to call them doctor because that's a status that's important to that person. It's talking about who somebody is with them and letting that person know that you still see them. So Tom Kitwood said a couple of other things about personhood. He talks about that actually people with dementia have the same attributes and needs as any other human being. And I think on some level, we all hear that and go, yeah, absolutely, that's true. But in practice, sometimes the way that we think and talk about people with dementia suggests otherwise, that somehow people with dementia are different than us, that they're abnormal, and that we'll talk about this a little more about kind of what that may result in. So people with dementia are actually equal to us. They're really, not less than just because they have a cognitive impairment. And there are ways in which we can ensure that people with dementia know that and feel that. And again, dementia is really shaped by the social and the interpersonal context rather than just the neurological changes a person experiences. That the experience of dementia is actually affects every aspect of a person's life, and that it could also be supported. A person could be supported to live well by fostering all those different aspects of a person's life. So I'll pause there and see if there's any comments or questions.
I had to get to my mic there. I think we're looking good.
Okay, great. This is, I think, a part that is helpful to kind of understand what personhood is. When we talk about like, what are the threats to personhood? Like, what is it that we do inadvertently at times, that could be a threat to a person's personhood. So I'll just pause and say that when I'm saying these things, I am not intending to be critical of any of us as individuals and saying we're bad human beings because, sometimes we may act in certain ways. This is, it's kind of like the messages that we've received about dementia for so long have influenced us in terms of how we see people with dementia. We always hear a negative story about people with dementia. When people with dementia are characterized as being violent, as shell, all these different things, then, that is sort of what influences us, regardless of whether that is really what we think necessarily. So we're
Yeah,
going to talk about, I'm sorry, go ahead, Steve.
yeah, like this discussions on personhood like this are sort of aligned with ageism discussions too.
Yes.
But I think that if we can look at people who have dementia as a whole person, and it really it helps everything. It helps sort of the ageism movement. It's just and I love these discussions because I always look at things through a different lens.
Mhm.
We're all kind of guilty of having biases, whether it's the way that we grew up or how somebody treated us, and this really opens our eyes to a new way of thinking.
I totally agree. And I think, Steve, it's like this takes a lot of humility, is this different way of thinking about things for all of us, and absolutely, like all of the isms kind of counter, like they all come together, right, to contribute to these views that we have about aging and about dementia. So you're absolutely right. Ageism, ableism, they all come together, paternalism. And it's again, not that we're the bad people. I mean, it's just that this is in the air that we breathe. And these are messages that we've been told. And so the work now is to think about this differently and to try to see a different way that we can see people with dementia and older adults as well. So I
I
appreciate,
think,
yeah. I'm sorry, go
you know,
ahead, Ellen.
yeah, no, I think this is great. And I think too, I think sometimes I think one of the challenges can be for people that if someone has a broken leg, you can see that, right? And so I think sometimes, because dementia, because you can't really see it, and that can make it
Yeah,
harder for people to kind of get their head around all of these things that you're talking about.
exactly.
And I think that maybe in some ways that's one of the barriers or one of the challenges.
I absolutely think you're right. And it reminded me too of Al Power, who's a geriatrician, also is a friend and colleague and works in this space, talks about how if someone like has a broken leg, right? We would not expect that person to get up a flight of stairs on their own, right? We would see their broken leg and we'd say, well, they can't do this, right? So we build a physical ramp for that person. When people have dementia, we similarly sometimes we think about it in a way differently. Like we sometimes don't realize there are things that we put in front of them that they can't do, or they can't do well. And so this idea of like, how do we build cognitive ramps for people? So it is what you're saying, Alan. It's like, because we can't physically see it sometimes, we make assumptions about what a person can't do. So yes, absolutely. Okay, I'll throw out a couple of thoughts here about threats to personhood and why this is important. So the way that we talk about people living with dementia is actually a threat to the personhood of people with dementia. And so what do I mean by that? So we tend to have language that we use with people with dementia that really may not help us to see a person before their dementia. So when we call people dementia patients or Alzheimer's patients, what we're doing inadvertently is reflecting on that person's medical diagnosis as being the most important thing about them. So what people with dementia have said to me, for example, is, when I'm not physically in front of my doctor, I am not a patient, I'm a person. So to call me a dementia patient makes me feel as if I'm different than other people, makes me feel as I'm sick, makes me feel like it's all about my medical condition and not who I am. And then we also have other terms that we use to describe people with dementia that also really focuses on what's wrong with them and actually characterizes them by that. So things are like a wanderer. We might reflect on a person with dementia as being a wanderer because that person walks around. We might say something as someone with dementia is an aphasic, meaning that they're having difficulties with communication, but we're not using really normal language to describe it. We're kind of labeling them. And so all of these terms can serve to really not help us see a person and to see them really just for their deficits. The way that we describe the way people living with dementia act is another threat to the personhood of dementia, of people with dementia. So I could talk about this forever, and I promise you I won't, but I'll just give one example. So we have a term called the Behavioral and Psychological Symptoms of Dementia, BPSD. And this refers to these symptoms that a person with dementia has. And so in the field, we talk about how people with dementia experience BPSD. Now, I don't know about you all, but I have many of these symptoms frequently. I have agitation, anxiety, elation, irritability, depression, apathy, disinhibition. Some might say I have delusions at some time, sleep changes, all of these things. So we tend to ascribe these normal, relatively normal, human emotions and experiences as being abnormal when it is being experienced by a person with dementia. And I'll add, of course, delusions and hallucinations can be true psychiatric symptoms, but in many cases in people with dementia, the way that we use that term is not actually psychiatric symptoms. It's because we are not understanding their experience from their perspective. And so I might, for example, I've worked with people living with dementia who have told me that there is a man in their room. And so one might say that person is having hallucinations because there's no man in that room. But when you investigate, you find that actually there is a coat rack in the room of the person with dementia, and they are interpreting that to mean that there is a man in their room. Is that a hallucination? Not really. So because a person has a diagnosis of dementia, we do tend to ascribe their behaviors as automatically being abnormal just because they have dementia. So other threats to personhood, we see people with dementia as lost, a shell, no longer there. We suggest that people living with dementia are not survivors. We suggest that in order, that people with dementia who are living with dementia are somehow not surviving, that they somehow are failing. We see people with dementia, only by who they were in the past, not by who they are now. People with dementia may not have choices. We may not give them choices. We may not encourage them to have a say in their lives. And generally, like I had said with BPSD, thinking that everything a person with dementia does is abnormal, when it could actually be just a normal human expression, a reaction to something that's happening. So I like to quote myself. This is a quote from a blog I wrote talking about, do people really live in the past? And, my concern in this blog I wrote was that sometimes when we only think about people with dementia as living in the past, that we're really not seeing who a person is today, who they are, what is important to them today, not just for what they can or can't remember, because sometimes that is how we evaluate a person with dementia, is based on what they can and can't remember. But who is this person? I mean, who are they right now? And, just like philosophically, one might say like self changes all the time. So a person continually evolves. And so there really is no reason for us to think that a person is just their past. They actually are also their present and their future. So I'm going to pause there for a second and see if there's any comments or questions.
Right. Let's see here. Yes, Susan says cultural sensitivity awareness. And Adele says we talk about them as if they aren't there or they can't hear us. I wonder how that makes them feel. And Jim says amazing the automatic assumption of incapability. Great comments. And what is it? It's there's that virtual reality program, Embodied Labs, and and they have this sort of, it's like a video to immerse you in what it's like to be somebody with dementia. And they have this one scene where the whole family is kind of mumbling and talking about the loved one. Oh, wow. I see Ginger Smith is in the audience. Folks, Ginger is the person that's going to be featured at the end of the month. I'll send the link in, who was diagnosed with dementia. And she said, I was ghosted by my family. So these are great comments from the audience. Great thoughts for you. Karen asks, so what to say when somebody asks, how is your husband doing? Yeah, that's a great comment. So I'm assuming, Karen, your husband has dementia, but what are some ways that we can respond to that promotes person-centered care?
That is such a great question. So I think that lots of times in any of these questions, what I ask myself is, how would I respond if this person did not have dementia? How would I respond in any situation, with this person or that question? So, thinking about that question, how would you respond if your spouse did not have dementia? What might you say? And to take that a step further, what is it that you would want people to know, about your husband, about how he's doing? And to also say, like, I don't think there's anything wrong with talking about some of the reality of living with dementia, right? It's hard, but to balance that with, well, my husband is doing these things, or he said the funniest thing the other day, or, I love learning about, him every day and listening to what he's saying. And I know there was Sarah Rowan is a person that used to work with the Eden Alternative, and her husband had dementia. And she used to talk about how she felt like the version of her husband was like version 2.0, and it was like a better version in some ways. And so she would talk about that, about her husband and this new version of himself. So I love that question, because I think within that is kind of an advocacy, for your husband, and also this intention to try to help people see him differently. So I love that. Thank you for that question.
Great.
Any others? All right, I will move on.
Yep.
Okay, so we'll talk about stigma a little bit, because that's important to this conversation. So stigma is a word that we use to basically just describe how we make assumptions about a person based on a condition that they have, whether it's a medical condition, a disability, lots of different qualities. And so I like the way the Alzheimer's Society of Ireland has distinguished that there are two types of stigma at least. And one is external, and that's the stigma that, is kind of towards a person. And then there's this other internal stigma that a person with dementia feels about themselves. So it's like internalized. So like you said, Steve, with ageism, we similarly have different types of ageism. And there's an internalized version of all of these isms in which the messages that people are hearing become how they think about themselves. And I know one of the comments had said, about what it must feel like, right, to have people talking over you or to not see you or to not acknowledge you. And I hear this all of the time from people living with dementia about how awful that feels, to have people see you differently or ignore you or make you, or, you feel invisible. And to take that a step further, for people that have communication challenges with dementia, if they are feeling that, their expression may come out in things like agitation and frustration because they're not feeling seen and heard. So it's like it's another way of connecting the dots is that, sometimes the reasons why people with dementia express anger is because they feel invisible, is because they're not feeling seen or heard. And so that's why one of the many practical reasons why it is important to see and hear people with dementia and to try to understand, what they're experiencing. So stigma. So, the idea is that, people really do feel less of a person because of stigma. And this idea is shown over and over again when you talk to people with dementia and in the research about stigma with people with dementia. And I'll just plug also that there is an amazing toolkit called the Flipping Stigma Toolkit that was developed by a group at the University of British Columbia in their for Personhood and Dementia Care. And it's an excellent online guide that you can go through with videos from people with dementia describing stigma in different, very real, practical ways. And there's educational tools in there. So it's a really great resource. So why do we have stigma? Well, many, many different reasons. But one of the reasons why we have stigma with people with dementia is actually because of a medical model of dementia that really is pervasive. So again, we know that dementia is considered a medical condition. The conditions that cause dementia are medical conditions. However, the experience of living with dementia is more than medical. Yet we tend to still mostly see dementia in a medical lens, and there are challenges with that. So when we only see dementia through a medical lens, we tend to focus on deficits. So my colleague and friend Steve Sabat talks about this. He's a neuropsychologist and a former professor at Georgetown. And he talks about how neuropsychological assessments, so those are all those tests that do mental status, exams, and they ask us all these questions about to remember things or do things to see where our cognition is. The reality is like they're good in a controlled environment, but they're not really meaningful in real life, So in real life, that doesn't really tell us a lot about how a person can function necessarily. How, and the reason is because maybe you can't remember these three words, but maybe you could also have an amazing conversation with the people around you. And so that's not kind of a part of a neuropsych assessment, is what the person can still do and how they can apply these skills to their everyday life. So if we just look at things from a medical perspective, we tend to just see the things that are wrong with a person. We also tend to abnormalize everything a person with dementia says or does. And so any reaction a person has, any behavior, any just even words sometimes that a person with dementia uses, we say that's because of their dementia. That's just what people with dementia do. And so that is an abnormalization. And that causes us to see people with dementia as being different than us, rather than empathizing and being like, I get angry too. I feel lonely sometimes. I do these things. Sometimes I say curse words, rather when we abnormalize it, it others people and kind of pushes them a little bit away from us. The medical model puts a lot more emphasis on pathology than everyday living, and less emphasis on experiential living and emotional well-being. So in my work and with my courses and the consulting I do, like what I feel like I have to do a lot of encouragement on is the idea that actually in some ways the best treatment, for dementia is focusing on emotional well-being. It's about coping, adaptation, focusing on your psychological strengths, resilience. Those are the things actually that are helpful to people in learning to live with dementia. And that is really not a part of the medical model. And again, the medical model has more of a focus on cure more than care. Not that we all don't want to see cures for many types of dementia. It's just that it's a little bit unbalanced, I would say, per most people's observations about how we can better support people with different care strategies. So why is this important? one of the reasons why it's important is because with stigma and with all these other ideas, all these threats to personhood, is when a person starts to internalize these ideas and sees a person with dementia only as being decline and not having abilities, it's very difficult for a care partner or for anybody around that person to forge a positive relationship with that person, and particularly a person-centered relationship with that person. And so these threats to personhood can really keep us from seeing a person in their totality and having a strong relationship with them. And I think this is such a relevant quote for dementia, is that, what we see depends mainly on what we look for. And I'll just give a small example of this to bring this home, is that in working with people with dementia, what I hear a lot, especially from family care partners, is that, well, my wife and I went to this event and she was talking to all these different people, and then they found out somehow she had dementia and nobody could believe it because she was social and she was laughing. And, one of the things that we talk about is it could be that in those events, people are not looking for the deficits. They're not looking for what's wrong with your wife. They're looking for her as a member of her church, as a social being. And so what they see depends on what they look for. So I'll pause there again if there's any other comments or questions.
Yes, here we go. Okay. Um, okay, we got a few here. Renee says, at one point, do you think someone should be in memory care? In my opinion, at what point do you think that people should be in memory care? In my opinion, sometimes people wait too long.
Mm. That's a really great question. I mean, it's so obviously so complex and individual, in terms of when a type of care that we call memory care might be beneficial to a person. And typically memory care is it's a type of long-term care in either nursing homes or assisted living, senior living, in which there is a physically separate area where people with dementia live. And ideally, there is also programming, that's unique to supporting people living with dementia. It's difficult to answer that question, about when it's the right time for each person. I can tell you many, different examples in which I've heard from different people. I mean, sometimes the right time is when, frankly, a family caregiver or care partner is experiencing physical, emotional challenges as a result of caregiving that make it very difficult for them to take care of a person. And so it's just the right time because they just can't physically or emotionally do it anymore on their own. And they recognize that they need some help and that residential care might be the best situation. For
Um,
some, I'm sorry, go ahead, Steve.
Oh, no, no. I'm sorry. You know me. I was like, oh, here, I got another question. Oh,
No, go ahead.
thank you. That was good.
Okay, good.
But Sarah asks, do you have a link for the stigma guide that you referred to?
I do, and I don't have it exactly at my fingertips. I have to make sure I give you all the right one. If you do Google flipping stigma dementia, I'm quite sure it'll show up. But if there's a pause at the end, I will quickly look it up and put it in the chat box.
Okay, great. And
Or you
then
can email me.
yeah, and if worst case, we will definitely put it on the
Okay,
recording link.
great.
Someone asks thoughts on when normal behaviors of anger, depression, agitation, shutting down become everyday events. What can we do in those situations?
That is such a great question. I'm going to table it because I have some responses to that are coming up that might be helpful if I can come back to it because it's such an important question.
Okay, and then I have found the flipping uh the I'm putting the flipping
Okay,
dementia
great.
stigma toolkit in
Great.
chat.
Awesome. Such a great kit. And by the way, it was a kit that was developed with people living with dementia. So they created the content, they tested it, and they talk about it. And so there's also accompanying webinars, all sorts of stuff. So it's really great.
Okay, cool.
Okay,
Yeah, let's
I'll
keep on going and
keep
then
on going.
get to the rest of the question.
Okay, let's get to the, so now it's the section of, well, what do we do about all of this? What do we do? Well, the good news, there are things that we can do. So we can shift our thinking from this biomedical model to a person-centered model. And so I'll talk about that in a second of what I mean by that. So this means not ignoring the biomedical model, meaning like there's a purpose, for biomedical information. Obviously, there's a diagnostic process, there's medical treatments, but that we remind ourselves that it's not the only way of looking at dementia. And also I think, challenge sometimes what we hear about dementia, that is this really just one part of the story? Is this part of the story that we're hearing everything about a person with dementia, or is it just one fragment of that person? So shifting our thinking. So the way I define person-centered care, for people with dementia particularly, is about seeing things from the perspective of the person with dementia and honoring who they are as individuals. So classically, we talk about values of person-centered care as being choice, dignity, respect, self-determination, meaningful living. Those are the values that we are trying to implement, to apply to everything that we do. But I think it's really useful to think about with person-centered care that this is essentially really about this idea of seeing things from their perspective all the time, trying to understand, what this person is thinking, feeling, where they're coming from, and why they may be thinking, feeling that way, and trying to honor what's important to them. So obviously, this is not straightforward all the time, and this can get very sticky because a person with dementia may have things that are important to them that we don't agree with, that we think is not important. Or, gets really sticky because there might be things that a person with dementia wants to do that are risky. And we have to navigate that. And, an example I would give is I was working with a couple. The man had dementia, and he and his wife, and he was sharing with me that since he had a diagnosis of dementia, his wife had not let him go on his walks anymore by him. And so when I talked to her about it, she said that she had been told that because he had dementia, it would be unsafe for him to go on walks. And so she just told him he couldn't do it. So we talked about, why are walks important to him? What was this meaning? And it turned out it was extremely important to him. It was a part of his everyday life. He really missed it. And so as we got to better understand what this meant to him, we could come up with better solutions, for how to try to adapt so that he could go on walks. And so we came up with several different solutions that would sort of keep him safe, so that if he did get lost, or to prevent him from getting lost, that he could still go on the walks. But we tried to look at it from his perspective and understanding what he wanted, rather than just saying, well, now that he has dementia, that's not something he can do anymore. So we can stop the stigma. And so some of these are from a great paper. It's called Elevating Experience for Those Living with Dementia. And a couple of things that they suggest is, recognizing the reality of dementia as a lived experience. So that means, again, seeing the perspective of the person who's experiencing it, even asking them about it to the degree that they can and want to talk about it. And I'll say that not everyone who has a diagnosis of a type of dementia or MCI wants to talk about it or is willing to talk about it. And some people don't actually have insight into their condition, because of changes in their brain, they're not able to actually fully process, what this experience is. However, my experience has been that sometimes if you don't use the words dementia or Alzheimer's or cognitive impairment, people can and will talk about some of their experiences. So in one of my recent early stage groups, we were talking about what it's like to live with different types of dementia. And I just simply started talking about memory loss and what that's like on a day-to-day basis to forget things. And this one gentleman who never would talk about the fact he has Alzheimer's chimed in and said, yeah, I forget things sometimes. It's so frustrating. And so that was meeting him in his lived experience of what it's like, to live with these things. And so I think we can try that to try to understand. Restoring the fullest measure of dignity and humanity to people. And so partially, obviously, seeing them as a whole human being, but I think all is really asking ourselves, what does this kind of academic, kind of complicated phrase mean? What does that mean to restore dignity and humanity? So maybe in some ways that's encouraging a person to be a part of things. Another example that came to mind is there was a couple I was working with recently, and the person with dementia kept going to the stove and trying to use the stove, and her care partner was concerned legitimately about her leaving the stove on. So she actually took all the knobs off the stove to keep the person from dementia from using the stove. That's a legitimate response, and it may be the best response. But I would, in that situation, what I would suggest is to try to take a step back and to understand, how would we restore dignity and humanity in this situation? And so one of the things you might do is try to understand what that person was trying to do, why, what's important to them. Do they want to just be a part of a cooking experience? Do they want to make dinner for someone? Do they just want to be a part of daily life? And if that's the case, how do we then encourage a person to do that? Other kind of recommendations here about not underestimating a person's abilities, really trying to encourage choice whenever possible. I mean, one thing I try to encourage is like, give a person with dementia power as much as possible. Give them power as much as possible. I mean, imagine if all day, every day, you were just told what you can't do. You're told, don't do that, don't touch that, don't go there, you can't leave. That would be really upsetting. And so where can we say yes to people with dementia? Where can we give them power back? And, check our filters, right? Are we making decisions on behalf of people with dementia when we could be asking them, or at least noticing how they're reacting to decisions and trying to adjust based on that? Meeting a person with dementia where they are. We say this a lot, but one way of interpreting this is being curious about a person with dementia, being curious about what they're saying, why they're saying it, what they're trying to tell us. And so, one of the things, to go back to the question before about kind of knowing when behaviors are problematic, I suppose, or not, is whenever possible, when a person with dementia is acting in a certain way, that we go back to the root and we try to understand why. So why is the person angry? What happened? What happened right before this situation where we saw anger or frustration? What do we think emotionally the person's experiencing? We could even ask them, what are all the possible reasons why a person might be acting this way? And my colleague Karen Stobie and I came up with actually a whole worksheet about this, of different kind of possible reasons why a person with dementia might act in the way that they are acting. And it's everything from like, are they in pain? Are they hungry? Are they thirsty? Are they bored? Is there overstimulation in the environment? Are they frankly upset with something that we said? Do they feel like that we are overbearing? Are they tired? There's so many different reasons that could explain why a person with dementia is acting that way. So to generally, answer that question about behaviors and kind of how to respond to them, I would say like we have to be curious about it first. We have to try to understand what's happening there for us to be able to evaluate then how to respond to it. Because as you can hear, some of those reasons why a person with dementia is acting that way are sort of solvable. If a person's hungry or they're tired or they're overstimulated. And then there certainly are cases in which a person with dementia is experiencing emotions and they're having these actions because of brain changes that are difficult for them to manage. And that's when I suppose we can also look at medical assistance to see if there's anything that can help for a person, like if they're experiencing anxiety or depression and there's some type of treatment that we can use to help that person. So I hope that answers that question to some extent. I know it's a really big question and a really important one. And so just another example of why it's important to ask why is we may see a person with dementia and who is walking, and we may just assume that's what people with dementia do. They wander. That term alone, it's very judgmental. It kind of suggests things are aimless. People don't know where they're going. It could be actually that, if we reframe this idea that the person is walking, they like to walk. Now, there could be reasons why they're walking, could be reasons, why they're walking more or they're trying to walk outside. But to just simply look at it as a label of a person with dementia is probably not going to help us. Now, granted, if we're talking about a person wandering or walking, and what we're meaning is that they're walking out of the house, unattended, and it's dangerous. What we have to do is try to think about them. Well, what could we do to support this person to walk if that's what they want to do? How can we make this safer for them? But I think we could be limited by simply just saying, like, people with dementia wander, that's what they do, and we have to stop them from doing it. And lastly, I'll just say that, one of the ways in which we can foster personhood, that we can help people with dementia to live well, is to really focus on what we would consider emotional needs. And so this was, and well-being. And this is a pyramid that was created by Al Power and Eden Alternative to look at sort of what are the different ways in which we experience well-being as all of us as human beings. And what Al did was kind of make it into a hierarchy, sort of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you've ever heard that. But this idea that these are all these components that a person with dementia needs in order to have a sense of well-being. And so you can see these are not medical terms, these are not medical experiences, these are life experiences. So a person needs to feel connected to other people. They need to have a sense of identity. They need to have autonomy. So that's like what I was saying of giving people power whenever possible, a sense of security. Sometimes, I know this is like sort of controversial to say, but a big challenge in long-term care we have is when people with dementia try to leave a memory care area. And clearly that could be very dangerous. But one of the questions I ask is that person leaving perhaps because they're not feeling secure in their environment? And so if that's the case, how do we provide security to a person? How do we make them feel like they belong? And that maybe they even sort of want to be here to some degree. So growth, that's people with dementia can continue to learn and grow. People with dementia need to have meaning in their lives. They need to seek out meaning that looks different for each person. And it's an adapted, experience depending on a person's abilities as well as their disabilities. And lastly, joy. I mean, we can have joy and live with dementia. And it's something that not only people with dementia can seek out themselves, but it is something that we can foster in people with dementia. And so I feel like these are very powerful things that we can do. This is very empowering to me to know that, there are many things that we may not be able to do to eradicate different types of dementia right now. There's not really very effective medical treatments, frankly. But one of the things that we can do is we can honor a person's personhood. That's something we all can do. So that is all I have to say for right now. I never have a shortage of things to say, but I look forward to hearing more questions or comments.
Yeah, this is great. And yeah, we're like-minded in that is that when I get on a roll of something that I'm interested in, I can keep going. And I just wanted to let everybody know, we're at 1 o'clock, but this is recorded. So if you have to jump off, you can catch the remainder of the conversation. But I'm going to go through chat and address some of these questions that came in. Let's see. Okay. Deb says, many times I've been out and about with a person living with dementia or in a wheelchair. I'm asked questions about our client when the person should have been asked directly. How do you suggest handling this situation to protect the dignity of the person living with dementia?
Such a good question. What I've done at times is I've just looked at the person with dementia and said, Steve, what do you think about that? And bringing them into the conversation, or, saying something similar, being like, Steve might be better able to answer that than me, know. So I think there are gentle ways you can do it, but I love that idea of modeling that.
Yeah, no, great suggestion. Barbara says, my sister is aware enough of her situation, which has been gradual over the last decade. She cringes when she hears the word Alzheimer's. She doesn't feel much better about the term dementia, though I've tried to explain to her that it only means memory loss, which I'm suffering as well. I have Parkinson's and ADHD, so memory loss and comes up a lot. She has said she wishes she was more out of it so that she wouldn't be aware of these terms. I've had similar conversations with individuals uh, living with dementia and a diagnosis of just, the fact that I'm aware of that this is going on. I want to fast forward to where I'm not aware. Have you heard similar, conversations and any words of wisdom that that we might help people who are in these situations.
Yeah, I so appreciate that comment. And I think this is exactly the point, right? Is that these terms are so loaded with so many negative connotations that of course a person doesn't want to use them or, even self-identify with them. And so first of all, I encourage people to use whatever terms they want that they feel comfortable with, or not, Sometimes I simply just say things like, do you feel like you're having problems with thinking? Like it's hard to think, and that something just like that, resonates with people. But I would also say, what might be helpful is for her to join some different groups where she can talk to other people that are experiencing cognitive impairment and dementia because it normalizes it. And it could be, what I hear from many people is that they are afraid to talk about these things because they feel like it distinguishes them in not a positive way, right? And so they don't want to be the outsider. But when they're with people, that are experiencing similar things, the conversations that happen are usually around this of, what it feels like and what it means to have these diagnoses, how some people feel like they claim them. I claim this for myself. And other people say, I don't want to claim it. Like, I don't want to be dementia. I want to be something else. But that conversation alone, I think, is very like normalizing and comforting to people. And so a couple of the different groups out there, Dementia Action Alliance, they have groups of people living with dementia that get together virtually. Another group called the National Council of Dementia Minds. And they also have virtual groups that get together and talk about their experiences together. And then there's other ones that are sort of around the world, but those are two of the main ones in the United States. And so that could be possibly something that could be helpful.
Mhm. Wow. This is great. And I'm let's see. My sister, where are we at here? Oh, okay. Sorry. Let me get to the questions keep on coming in here. Let's see. Ellen, my dad was living with dementia for the last 4 years. Towards the end, he was in a wheelchair and lived in a community. One day he scooted past a few nursing stations at the facility and ended up outside. The facility he had been living in for 6 years wanted to kick him out. When I asked my dad, why did you go outside? He said, I was looking for a toilet. Yeah, I mean, these are, and Barbara says, my sister has so much trouble expressing herself that she doesn't talk to anyone except another sister and me. Yeah, this is not just with this type of diagnosis or life change is it's very difficult for a lot of folks to express how they feel and share for fear that, I mean, one of the main reasons is, oh, they're going to lock me up. They're going to send me
Right.
away. Like they're not going to
Absolutely.
view me as a person.
Absolutely. My gosh, there's so many important things you said there, Steve, is, one, I think, to the question of the gentleman in the wheelchair and senior living or the comment, um, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, frankly, in education, in senior living and in the world of aging about, how we can best respond to people with dementia, be curious about them, understand where they're coming from, right? Try not to have like knee-jerk reactions, all that kind of stuff. That's one thing, right? It's like there's a lot of work to be done, and we can be a part of that. We can be educators, we can model some of that, but frankly, there's a paradigm there that is very medically driven that we're constantly trying to counteract by trying to encourage people to see the person and understand who they are. I do think there are so many people that it's so uncomfortable for them and so many reasons to talk about all of this. And I think we have to honor that, to a large degree until a person is ready, if they're ready. I think there's other ways that we can talk about challenges people have. Sometimes I just simply say things like, when you can't find the word, like I do that all the time. Like the word is just not there, right? And it's like how frustrating. And just simply talking about something like that is enabling, for a person to be able to share their experiences. I think, something you had said, Steve, made me think about this idea of providing opportunities for people to come together in normal ways, that where people can kind of live life and it's not sort of like a feel that it's therapeutic or it's like medical, just like giving opportunities for people to come together and chill, And so, an example is memory cafes, they vary very much, but that's kind of a model where people with different types of memory or cognitive challenges come together and socialize. But it doesn't just have to be about people with with similar challenges coming together. I think it's the idea of like really trying to uh, bring people together. And it's understandable that people may not want to share, some of the challenges they're having, especially with other people that they feel may judge them. And so that is a really tough situation. I think for me, it's education is key. And I'll just say last that, some of the work I've done is in retirement communities that have independent, assisted nursing, different levels of care. And one of the biggest challenges that they experience is that the people who don't have dementia really are very challenged by the people who have dementia, and they actually either avoid them or even sometimes make life very difficult for them. And when you talk to them and try to understand what's happening, what you find is that it's all fear, and lack of education. Is that, the people without dementia really don't understand what dementia is. They have assumptions about dementia. And when you really humanize it, and, more create like empathy, they're actually much more likely, to embrace and to honor people with dementia who are their neighbors. And so I think that's something that we can practice in different ways.
I love it. All right. Well, I think this has been great, and it no surprise that we went over an hour because it's just great information, great comments from the audience. Sonia,
Thank you.
love your insight. I'll make sure to have all your contact information and
Yeah.
everything on the recording link. I hope some of you in the audience reach out to
Yeah.
Sonia and get more information, partner, brainstorm, what have you. And of course, our Aging Together and Ellen Phipps for the wonderful work they're doing. I was so glad to be partnering up with Ellen and Aging Together on this discussion.
Same here. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you all for this amazing discussion. I always learn so much from you.
This is great. Okay, talk to you all at the next one.